Welcome to the New World, where we read the new classics. You read books that were written in the 20th century? That's okay, boomer. Today we're talking about classics, new classics in particular, books that I personally feel will be considered genuine classics in another 50 to 75 years, some of which are already very well on their way. But I am restricting this list to books that have been written in the 21st century. Anything from anything is disqualified from being considered for my recommendations for this particular video. And I'm going to start the video off with the easy pick, the one that everybody kind of already expects to be on this list. You probably came into this going, oh, I bet Piranesi's there. Yes, it is. Of course it is. Susanna Clarke's just magnificent, brilliant, beautiful novel, Piranesi. It is, I don't want to say too much, it's a book about Piranesi, and he lives in a magical house, and there's tides that live on the bottom floor, and then he lives in the middle with some animals and some other things exist, statues. It's this weird, strange, magical house with clouds and birds in the upper level. It is wonderful, but this world is not quite what it seems. Piranesi's not quite what he seems. It's just, everything about this is just, it's so hard to explain. Beautiful and magical, and I don't want to say too much because the less you know going into this book, the better the experience will be for you. It's so fabulous. The themes are deep and rich. The world is deep and rich. Everything about it's just so beautifully told and just so beautifully written. Now, I will say your mileage may vary because it's not a super action heavy or event heavy book. It's more just like existing inside of the mood and the atmosphere that is this book that makes it so magical. And then it does so much with such a small amount of time while leaving it still so open-ended and open to interpretation and then reinterpretation. It just makes it such a perfect addition to a list of modern books that will be considered classics. I think this is the most sure one on my entire list. This is the most one that I would say is damn near an absolute lock. Next up is actually maybe my most controversial pick for this list, because I'm going to say that it's going to be Clara and the Sun by Kazuo Ishiguro. This is a little bit polarizing in the science fiction community because it is more so a lit fic, like literary fiction, than actual science fiction. And I think the science fiction community pushes back against that because they're, really into their hard sci-fi and their science and their this and all of that. But I think the fact that this leans more into literary fiction and less actual science fiction is exactly why it will be considered a classic in the future, because that just seems to be the tendency that people have. The literary fiction is much more heralded as the classics, and science fiction just tends to be genre fiction that people enjoy. Nothing against science fiction. It is quite possibly my favorite genre of all time. But I'm just saying, from the perspective of, say, the intellectuals and the people who are going to look back on this time and go, you know what? The one that kind of stood above the rest and kind of held its head high was Clara and the Sun. Clara and the Sun is a book about an artificial friend, like an AI companion doll that goes and is given to a little girl and is meant to be her companion. We then are Clara. We are locked inside of her perspective. If she doesn't see it, we don't see it. If she doesn't hear it, we don't hear it. We are her, and her perspective is ours throughout the book, which gives us one of the most unique, interesting perspectives on a story, because the world building is so brilliant and so beautifully done and so beautifully built, but it's so hard to get a grasp on sometimes because people will start a conversation in the room with us and then finish the conversation somewhere else. So we don't get all of the information because we're stuck in this one spot, because we aren't a part of the world, not fully anyway. It's just brilliantly told. It's brilliantly done. Of course, it's Kazuo Ishiguro. Kazuo Ishiguro already has the Nobel Prize in literature. So I mean, that's another shoe-in for him to just be, if you're going to look back on the classics, you might as well look back on the Nobel Prize winners. And even though he's a Nobel Prize winner, I still feel like this is a hot button book that I'm throwing in here because I feel like this is the one that I might get pushed back on. But I'm telling you, the themes, the way it works, the way it's told, the way we experience the story, everything about this is so truly brilliant and just outside of the box that it was popular in the moment with the people that connected with it. But I think this is going to age like fine wine, and I think history will be on the side of Clara. I just have that feeling. Next up, we're going to have to talk about Haruki Murakami, and it's going to have to be Kafka on the Shore. This is not my favorite Haruki Murakami book. That would be one Q84. But if you put a gun to my head and said, hey, which one out of all of Murakami's books is going to be the modern classic, I'm going to have to say it's going to be Kafka on the Shore. This is the one that is just the most, once again, literary of all of them, if that's even a thing with Murakami's work. This one goes so far into the magic in the magical realism that it is kind of wild. He himself, the author, Murakami, has described this book as like a book of riddles within riddles, and those riddles don't come with answers. And it is exactly that. And it's so puzzling, and it's so confusing, and it's so weird. He named it Kafka on the Shore because he was really trying to channel a Kafka-esque novel. Now, it's not super Kafka-esque from my understanding. I've not actually really delved into Kafka yet, but it is Murakami dialed to 1,000,000. And we have Kafka, a young boy who he's a runaway, and he's hiding off in this small town, and he's hiding from who he is. And then we have this old man who can talk to cats, who is on his own entire journey over here. And we do the pretty typical Murakami thing where we go from one chapter to the next. We follow the boy, then the man, then the boy, then the man, who they will ultimately meet up in the end. And it's a coming of age story for the boy, but it's also just a story about life and existence and everything all at the same time, all while being the most confusing thing you've read in quite a long time. Like I said, riddles within riddles with no answers. And you could read this multiple times, and every time you could read it, you come a little bit closer to an idea of what you think the book is supposed to be saying, while never actually coming down with an idea of exactly what the book is saying. So, once again, something that lends itself to that kind of interpretation, that kind of deep study over years and over generations, and then using it as a lens to look back on the year it was written in, or maybe the lens of the year that it's being read in. And this is a good book for that. This is just... It's going to be. And this is one of the ones that I think is actually well on its way already, because this was written in, 2002? So it's almost a quarter of a century old already. It's already being studied. It's already endlessly discussed and debated. I think this one's one that's very, very, very well on its way to already being a classic. Give it another 50 years. See what happens. Next up is another one that's extremely puzzling, but if Kafka on the Shore is a book of riddles, this book is the riddle, and that is House of Leaves. This one, again, another one that is also very well on its way to already being a classic. This is the oldest of the bunch. This one almost didn't make the list because it was written in the year 2000. It almost disqualified itself. If it would have been like 6 months earlier, it would not be here, but it qualifies anyway. This one, once again, like I said, very well on its way to being a classic already. This is a full 25 years old, and it is the shining example of ergodic literature. If somebody says, what is ergodic literature? House of Leaves is pretty much the first answer that anyone ever gives somebody as a good example of what ergodic literature is. I don't know if it's the best example of what it is, but it is almost universally the first. It is a book about this family that moves into the Navidson house, and they're going to document their time living in the house, and they use cameras and they film themselves, and strange things start to happen, and the house is bigger on the inside than it is on the outside, and there's secret places inside of this house. But then the book is written by a man who was studying the films that they left behind, but he died while writing this. And another person then takes those papers that he was writing and attempts to make sense of it and make a book of it. And we're reading their notes on the book about the video, about the family, about the house. And it is like, it's insane. There's pages that are written right side up, pages upside down. There's, like I said, the book itself is a mystery and a puzzle. And it's just, like I said, it's so firmly entrenched in the zeitgeist already that it's another one where you give it another 50 to 75 years, and this will be the touchstone of the ergodic genre completely. I 100% believe that. And I say that knowing full well that this is kind of a love it or hate it book. There is a lot of people who read this and absolutely despise House of Leaves. And I get it, just due to the weird, obtuse nature in which it was written. But I'm just going to say, you don't like all the classics, do you? The old ones? Neither do I. Don't feel bad about it. But it will be one. And then last but not least, I wanted a series on here. I wanted to kind of get an idea of a series that I think will be a classic in the future. And I was actually originally thinking about putting Malazan on here, but it disqualified itself due to the fact that Gardens of the Moon was released in the 90s. Yes, it was 1999, and I could have stretched my stipulations and my qualifications for the list and got it on here, but I decided not to, because even more so than that, as much as I do genuinely think that Malazan will be a classic, I think an even better example for a modern classic would be The Dandelion Dynasty by Ken Liu, simply because it is so different. And it is so outside of the box of what you would typically expect from a modern fantasy, from a fantasy series, period. This is silk punk. It is like a old epic high fantasy book, but it's also told with some very sci-fi genre sentimentalities in the way that it's written, in the way that the author focuses in and hones in on certain things. But then at the same time, like I said, silk punk, so it's like this old fantasy world of like a pseudo-Chinese empire with technological advancements, and there's no magicians, but the magicians are engineers, and there are dragons, and there's flying ships, and there's just so much interesting stuff happening here. And then it is told in such a unique way. The first book is almost like a history book. The second book is the most straight down the middle fantasy book that is fantasy books in the at least in this series. And it's really almost like a paint by numbers, but in the most epic and satisfying way. Then the third book has arguably one of the most subversive climactic end battles I've ever read in a book ever, which I thought was brilliant. Throws a lot of people for a loop, sometimes bucks them right off the series, but either way, it's just so uniquely told. The fourth book comes back around to much more traditional storytelling beats, but in a non-traditional way. It is so brilliant and so uniquely told all the way through. It can't be anything but considered a classic in the future. It has to be. I mean, I can't imagine a series more uniquely set to be poised to be analyzed in the future, to be spoken about in the future, to really create a whole new genre and a whole new style of storytelling in and of itself. Then there's just the sentimentality that's baked into Ken. He's a very human writer. The way that he writes people, the way that he writes emotional beats is just so soft, and he's got just a softly human way of portraying a story and doing it in a way that has not been done before and is just uniquely Ken Liu. Anyway, that's the list. I genuinely think these are going to age very well, and I think there will be classics in the future. What do you think, and what is your list? Let me know some books you think will be classics in another 50 to 75 years. As always, everybody, the link for my Patreon is in the description below. The link for my Discord's in the description below. Thank you for watching, and I will see you next time.